Okay, this is gonna be episode 4. Is this No, this is episode 3 of the Conservatarian podcast. Today, we are introducing who I hope will be our third host. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me. My name is John Chang. I am one half of the podcast Otters Talking Politics. We are a libertarian leaning news and philosophy podcast. We take the news of the week, boil it down to its core issue, and then discuss the libertarian philosophy behind it. I'm also branching out in a sense to my own thing, Mr. Otter, going along with the Otters Talking Politics theme, where I'll be taking news articles and news points within the week and discussing them also.
I mean, all right, sounds good. Obviously, well, not obviously. We're gonna the two main segments of today is basically gonna be, maybe 10 minutes going through the State of the Union, and then I don't know, however long it takes us to get through the Green New Deal, um, which I think probably 2 out of 3 of us would say is a complete disaster. I only say 2 out of 3 because Micah hasn't actually read the Green New Deal, so I mean, it doesn't. It's like fine, but like I'm not gonna make any predictions about how he's gonna assess it because that's for his own opinion, which is the beauty of free speech. Well, actually, that was a dumb sentence. Um, yeah, we're just gonna get right into it. Um, we're gonna start off by kind of our basic first thoughts on this before we actually dive into the actual documents that we've got up in front of us here. Um, any first thoughts before we get into this, John?
Just for initial thought, I guess, is the fact that the Green New Deal isn't what it's chalked up to be. This type of thing has been tried before, and it's actually had the inverse result happen. So um, that's a quick summation, but we can go into detail about it later, I guess.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would have to say before we get into this is it's absolutely ridiculous, and it would cost us. I can't remember who put the price tag on this, but it's something like 30 trillion, or maybe it's double that. I can't remember the exact figures, but definitely a lot of taxpayers' dollars. Definitely a lot more than we can pay in however long this is going to be around for until it's voted out of office, um, or voted out of the law. Um, I mean, the basic things that I know about it is that she wants to. I'm gonna say she. I'm talking about AOC. Um, she wants to replace. She wants zero carbon emissions, uh, in 10 years. She wants to replace all air travel with high speed trains, which makes it kind of hard for the people in Hawaii, but whatever. And what else does she want? She wants guaranteed basic income, guaranteed actually, yeah, and then it's subs, and then like the government will pay you if you're unable to work or unwilling. I think is what it said. But any mistakes that I have right now, it's gonna be we're gonna die. We have the whole document in front of us, so we're gonna be able to tell you exactly what's in it uh, in the next couple minutes. But first, we're gonna talk about the State of the Union, um, just because so we can get that out of the way. Uh, John, how do you think that went?
Some people don't like the State of the Union because it's a lot of pomp and circumstance, which it is. But I kind of enjoy it at a sports level of just listening to the two quote unquote teams kind of throwing shade at each other. So I enjoyed that aspect marginally, and I always really enjoy the stories of some of the people that are invited to the State of the Union. So like the Holocaust survivor and
Mm-hmm.
one of his military liberators. That was a really great story, and
Yeah.
I think everybody can kind of get behind a story like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, out of 10, what would you give Trump?
Oh, out of 10, I would probably give him Well, let's see. Compared to his last one, I would probably give him an 8 or a 9 out of 10 because it was much better than his last State of the Union. Um,
Was it Stephen Miller or yeah, was it Stephen Miller that wrote his last year's speech or something like that? Because
I
I think
believe it was.
yeah,
I believe it was, and I don't think he did this year just because
yeah,
it was a lot less uh,
doom and gloom.
Nostradamus like doom and gloom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 absolutely. My personal rating, I'd probably give it an 8 or a 9 as well. Um, I thought it was so funny to watch the Democrats not stand up for lowest black unemployment in history, not stand up for lowest unemployment in general in history, and then right when they're like most women in Congress, all of the like everyone stands up, they're like woo, and AOC's giving air high fives and all this different kind of stuff, and I was like, you people are ridiculous. I mean, like the stuff you won't clap for, and then like when they start to congratulate you guys, you're like, oh yeah, we're so great, aren't we? It's like, geez Louise, you guys are so incredibly corrupt and like ridiculous. But I mean, whatever. It's we'll all forget about it within a week because the news would have changed by then. Um, Micah, what do your thoughts on the State of the Union? State of the Union.
Uh, so Trump, I I like Trump better when he's off the cuff. Of I don't know, but as far as like substance is concerned, actually no. I mean, Trump when he's doing professional things like these is kind of restrained.
Do you think that's
To
good or
read my
bad?
mind. You mean the State of the Union itself?
No, do you think him being restrained is good or bad?
I think it's leaps and bounds less entertaining.
True, true.
And partially, like, pretty much the main reason I like watching Trump talk is because he's like one of the most entertaining presidents to watch. I mean, like,
Absolutely.
so that's just my thought on the whole thing. Like I prefer off the cuff Trump, but
Okay.
that's just opinion.
Yeah, that's all right. This isn't actually. John, do you watch PewDiePie?
Yeah, I do watch a bit of him. I actually started watching him, and I've actually subscribed to PewDiePie to beat T series. So
Okay, good. Mike, I assumed you've done that, right? Subscribed.
I'm pretty sure I've been subs to PewDiePie for a while, although I haven't been watching him lately.
On how many accounts?
It is our podcast account sub to him.
Ooh, I actually don't know. But
I really only have the only account I actually use is my personal one,
that's all right.
and I am subscribed to him on that.
Okay.
But
All right. A little off subject there, but that's all right. Any final thoughts on the State of the Union before we move on to our big subject? Anyone?
yeah, I mean, I'll just say real quick that I wish that Trump had actually not given it and had just given a written letter or something like that to the House. I think it would have served him a lot better if he had not done it, even though he did do a good job in this one. Just from a political game theory type perspective, if he had remained stalwart with the government shutdown, just sent a letter or something like that, he probably would have been better off than he was giving the speech and ending the shutdown.
Yeah. I mean, I could probably pretty much agree with that. Obviously, the shutdown may or may not open up very soon. I don't know how many days away it is.
11, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at that point, if it reopens again, I think it's gonna turn pretty bleak. Yeah. I mean, after the whole month and however many days it was, or 38 something days, I can't remember exactly, but that was just everyone was like super like mad that the whole government had shut down in the first place. And if it were to happen again, I think at that point some of the workers would start to leave. I think it would just, yeah, they just wouldn't want to put up with this kind of thing. But
Oh yeah,
I don't
most
know.
definitely. This next one there'll be a lot more walkouts, a lot more people going and finding other jobs just because they'll know like this is par for the course and this is something that can happen consistently. So
Yeah,
better to go find job security elsewhere.
yeah. Micah, any final thoughts, or should we move on?
No.
All right, it's time for our thoughts. We're gonna read through the Green New Deal. So, I mean, let's get right into it. This is from NPR.org. We're gonna link this in the description of the published YouTube video when this comes out. I mean, yeah. Let's get started. So we're gonna just scroll through the index. I think it starts at page. Ooh, I don't even know. Wait. Okay, no, never mind. Starts at page 2. I don't know why I scrolled that far. I'll just start the reading, and then we'll kind of pause at different points throughout this, and I mean, yeah, we'll just go it like that. Global warming at or above 2 degrees Celsius beyond pre-industrialized levels will cause A, mass migration from regions most affected by climate change. B, more than...
Nope.
What?
Text.
Sorry?
Because I'm reading it from the beginning and I don't seem to.
Page 2.
Okay. All right.
More than $50 trillion in lost annual economic output to the United States by the year 2100. Wildfires by 2050 that will actually burn at least twice as much forest area in the western United States than was typically burned by wildfires in the years preceding 2019. A loss of more than 99% of all coral reefs on Earth. More than 350 million more people to be exposed globally to deadly heat stress by 2050, and a risk of damage to $1 trillion of public infrastructure and coastal real estate in the United States. And 4, global temperatures must be kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrialized levels to avoid the most severe impacts of a changing climate, which will require A, global reductions of greenhouse gas emissions from human sources of 40-60% from 2010 levels by 2030, and B, net zero emissions by 2050. 2050. Let's pause right there. What do you guys think? Do you think we're going to have net zero emissions in the United States by 2050 or no?
I don't think it's realistic at all, but I mean it's a lovely little fantasy.
What do you think?
Is it possible? Yes, it's definitely possible. I mean, anything's possible when it comes to human beings, and we would just drive our economy and the quality of life of more than half of the world into chaos. But it is feasibly possible to tear it all down, I guess.
Yeah, I think yeah, exactly. I think the thing that would be most affected by this whole thing would be our economy. I think many millions of people would be living in poverty if their main source of income requires some form of use of something that would cause emissions. The funny thing is that like we're worried about the United States or say Canada, where I'm at, like producing all these carbon emissions, but it's like it's not even close how much more carbon emissions is produced by developing countries. I mean, China is produces twice the amount of carbon emissions as the U.S. India is right under the U.S. I mean, But I mean, aside from that, like net zero emissions by 2050, do you think the American people will be willing to give up their cars, their the vast majority of their products to be able to have net zero emissions by 2050? Absolutely not. And I don't think the like the Green New Deal, it's a kind of a whatever thing, and I don't even think that the vast majority of Americans even agree with the things that are proposed on here. I don't think I haven't seen any big polls about how many people agree with this as of right now, but I don't think the numbers would be too high. But I mean, yeah, it's a wild plan.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of climate change has been around for 30 years in its newest form, but even you could even argue that it's been around for 60 years. And obviously people have been aware of it and haven't made their changes. So that either says one, that people aren't willing to do it, or number two, they don't fully believe that there will be these kinds of repercussions, which, or that it's worth it, I should say, that the repercussions that will be incurred are worth totally devastating their, I guess what you would call luxurious lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can start moving on. Yeah. Next paragraph. Whereas, because the United States has historically been responsible for the disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, having emitted 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions through 2014, has a high technological capacity, the United States must take a leading role in reducing emissions through economic transformation. Whereas the United States is currently experiencing several related crises, with one, life expectancy declining while basic needs such as clean air, clean water, healthy food, and adequate health care, housing, transportation, and education are inaccessible to a significant portion of the United States population. I'd like to see those figures. Clean air is not accessible to a significant portion. Clean water, or
I'm gonna do some fact checking. Just give me a minute.
I don't think 95% of the U.S. lives in Flint, Michigan. Sorry to break it to these people.
Yeah. So I think the big concept here is the fact that a lot of people live in LA, New York, San Francisco, even Dallas, Texas.
Yep.
And by clean air parameters, by the parameters that someone has put on that, delineates clean air from not clean air, those people would not be living in clean air areas.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take major metropolitan cities, add up all their population, you would probably have anywhere from 40 to 60% of the population in those areas, in non-clean air areas.
Yeah.
I used to live in Phoenix, Arizona. In fact, I was born there. And like every time I've gone back there from Washington, and I live in, it is pretty hectic on my body. Like I have like sinus issues and stuff, but I don't actually know. I mean, like,
I would think that a significant percentage of that is just due to temperature change. I don't think that wouldn't be clean air, but go on.
These two, and there's a lot of stuff to be allergic to for me. And hold on, I'm giving it a look right now.
Yeah, and there's also just a lot of dirt in Arizona in general. The soil's kind of loose and it's able to be blown pretty easily. I lived in Tucson for my college career because I went to the University of Arizona, so I could definitely concur that there's a lot of particulates and crap in the air in Arizona that would cause a lot of respiratory problems.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there could definitely be a case made that, however much percentage of the people that are living in poverty in the United States need to be dealt with in a way that would keep them out of that situation. But I mean, you don't compare the wealth of a nation to how rich the rich people are. You compare it to how rich the poor people are and how good their standards of living are. Because if the bottom people are living like not necessarily the people living on the street, but the people in the lowest income bracket. They have a TV, right? They have a fridge, they have air conditioning, they have all these different kinds of things that 20 years ago they wouldn't ever have had, right?
Okay, so I guess on indoor air quality, the U.S. actually does rank first. We're actually like the best in terms of indoor air quality.
Yeah.
Um,
But don't you remember what AOC said? There's still people in Alabama that are still getting ringworm, right, John?
well, no, I'm trying to see what the outdoor air quality is right now. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, this all just goes to show how these people are complaining about how bad the U.S. is. It's like, go live in China for 10 years and come back to me about how the air is so dirty here. Like, but whatever. We'll just keep moving on. Yeah. Another crisis that would be related to. Well, another crisis that they describe is a 4-decade trend of economic stagnation, deindustrialization, and anti-labor policies that has led to hourly wages overall stagnating since the 1970s despite an increased worker productivity. No. B, the third worst level of socioeconomic mobility in the developed world before the Great Recession. C, erosion of the earning and bargaining powers of the workers in the United States. And D, inadequate resources for the public sector workers to confront challenges of climate change at the local, state, and federal levels. And 3, the greatest ever income inequality since the 1920s, with A, the top 1% earners accruing 91% of gains in the first few years of economic recovery after the Great Recession. B, a large racial wealth divide amounting to a difference of 20 times more wealth between the average white family and the average black family. And C, gender earnings gap that results in women earning approximately 80% as much as the men at the median. Sounds like somebody hasn't done their research. I'm starting to doubt the I doubted it since the start, but the how factual this Green New Deal actually is.
Could you send me? I'm gonna be the fact checker here. Could you just send me a sentence from the okay, actually, just what is a claim that they just made there, and all
that the gender earnings gap that results in women earning approximately 80% as much as men at the median.
I mean, I haven't even thought about that in a year and a half or 2 years even. I mean, it's been that's actually no, more like a year and a half. Okay, so I kind of the anti-SJW stuff for a while. I kind of don't really find it as entertaining as I used to, so I don't pay attention to it anymore. But I remember that getting mentioned a lot, the whole gender wage gap thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, yeah. As far as it goes, with the top 1% of earners accruing 91% of gains in the first few years of economic recovery after the Great Recession, all I would have to say is I can guarantee you the vast majority of these politicians that are back in the Green New Deal are in the 1%. And then this also goes back to her 70% tax rate. I mean, some of that stuff just kind of gets ridiculous. Well, I mean, it's mostly ridiculous, but some of it just goes past.
So tell me what you know about the 70% tax rate.
I think it was a 70% tax rate at the people that were making over $10 million. Yeah.
Specifically, it's a 70% marginal tax rate, which means that all money made above $10 million is taxed at 70%. And we used to have a top marginal tax rate of like 90%, so this would actually be considered. I don't actually agree with that necessarily, but that's not like unprecedented by U.S. standards.
Yeah, but even Bernie Sanders would be okay with that.
Libertarian guy probably wouldn't like that because you don't like taxes, obviously. But
Yeah, and that's kind of a misnomer when it comes to the 90 cent or 90% tax rate, because a lot of times there were quote unquote tax loopholes
Exactly.
and rebates and tax write-offs you could do. So in
Exactly.
reality, the highest percentage that the
more
the
like
top earners were paying, it was about
40%,
50%.
right?
Yeah.
It was, I think it was 51 was
Yeah.
the
These.
highest.
Yeah. What these people don't understand is that, as Ben Shapiro has pointed out, if you make the top marginal tax rate at 70% for these people, they will pack up their things and leave. They will go to a different country where the tax rate is much lower, or a different state where it is much lower. They have the financial mobility to do that kind of thing if they're making over $10 million. But you know what? Whatever. Obviously, they didn't think of that before they started writing up this new Green Deal. So, any final thoughts before we move on, guys?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they'll just move, and that's kind of part of the whole. You have to have a captive audience for these kinds of things to work. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of, if this were to be enacted, which more than likely it won't, just because of the numbers and just because of how outraged most people would be. But
Yeah.
if we did see it enacted, the next logical step would be, oh well, the millionaires, the billionaires are trying to leave. Well, we have to make them stay, and it's just this is the first domino in what will be a nefarious, uh, authoritarian, right restricting uh, plan or scheme.
Yeah, and I definitely think that these definitely would set the grounds for something like that to actually come about. But I mean, yeah. Um, I guess we'll just move along then. Yeah. Whereas climate change, pollution, and environmental destruction have exacerbated systemic, racial, regional, social, environmental, and economic injustices referred to in this preamble as systemic injustices, disproportionately affecting indigenous communities, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. Referred to this in this preamble as the frontline, quote, and frontline and vulnerable communities. Oh boy. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm not even going to comment on that, but
Well, I
oh,
thought
you go
this
ahead.
was supposed to be an environmental plan.
Yeah, well,
What,
that's what they're
what
saying.
happened to that whole point?
They're saying they're like whereas climate change, all this kind of stuff, and they're like, climate change has resulted in exacerbated systemic racism, or regional, or disproportionately affecting all these different communities or different groups of people. I think you'd have to point me to some data that would suggest that climate change up until this point has disproportionately affected the elderly or the unhoused. Well, I mean, the unhoused, like, I don't even know how you can make that argument, because by their own standards, the earth would be warmer. And I think the unhoused would definitely like for it to be 1.5 degrees warmer outside. If it does come out to be that, then for it to be gradually cooler because of the programs that they say will lower these things. I think they would. I don't think the unhoused have specifically been affected by climate change in a very major way.
Right, and that's a big thing. Is like, let's just assume that climate change is happening and we're causing it or whatever. Let's just assume that climate change is happening and what they're proposing is going to happen right? A lot more people live around the equator than they do around the poles.
Yeah.
meaning that human beings are capable of surviving a temperature increase a
Yeah.
lot easier than they are a temperature decrease.
Yeah.
Uh, that doesn't necessarily mean everything else that would happen is necessarily good,
Yeah.
but it's not, a 2 even 3 degree Celsius change wouldn't uh, cause mass catastrophe to human civilization,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
because we live in places that are deserts and all sorts of things like that. So
Yeah, and the funny thing is that a lot of these predictions, like the sea level rising and all that stuff, like the Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's documentary, he did that in whatever it was, 2004, and he said by 2014, Florida would have lost like I don't even know how much like beach space or like, and the houses on the water would have been like the people that were living there would have been displaced. And then everyone, like, at the time, like 2004 up to 2014, they were all like, listen to this guy. He knows what he's talking about, and this is going to happen. That's why I need to do something. And then 2014 rolled around, and everyone's like, what the heck, Al Gore? You said that a bunch of stuff was supposed to happen, and nothing came true. And he's like, well, I'll just make another movie and make some new predictions. And then here we are. Yeah.
yeah, and going to that sea rise point, I forget what the study was or what the survey was, but it was done in the 1970s, and basically the consensus was, for every foot the sea level rises, you lose about 100 feet of shoreline, meaning that the shoreline moves back about 100 feet.
Yeah.
And if you look at the IPCC in their own words, in their own projections, they say the sea will rise about, I think it's about a meter, which is about a yard, which means we'll lose about 300 feet of seashore. And if you go and look at any seashore, you go stand on the coastline and you look about 300 feet in, we're not losing that much when it comes to real estate, when it comes to economic uh, loss. Just
It's not
overall
even that we
loss of
have.
stores.
It's not even that we're like we haven't lost any. It's that we're not losing any. Like we just haven't seen that major of a displacement of people. And like when you go to places like Florida, you can ask people like that, like, has the has the shoreline decrease affected you? And the vast majority would be like, well, not the vast majority. People would be like, what do you mean? What shoreline decrease? Yeah, I don't mean.
Right. And this projection is a 100-year projection. It's
Yeah.
supposed to. This is supposed to be what happens in the 2100. So
Mm-hmm.
you have 80 years to move 300 yards, or to make plans to move
Yep.
300, not yards, sorry, 300 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's definitely, and it's so funny because the IPCC and like all these projections that they put out, they change like every year. They change every 6 months. Like they don't actually make a prediction that actually stands the test of time without them like changing it from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees or from 3 degrees to 1 degree. Or it just is constantly moving, which kind of is increasing the actual like group of people that are just skeptical of climate change being an actual you know crisis or an actual like phenomenon that is going on right now. These predictions that are constantly changing makes it think that the makes the climate skeptics think that they just don't know what they're doing and they're just making this kind of stuff up, which I think is divisive. But yeah, I think that's pretty much that paragraph right there. If we want to move on. Yeah, next paragraph. Whereas climate change constitutes a direct threat to the national security of the United States by impacting the economic, environmental, and social stability of countries and communities around the world, and 2, by acting as a threat multiplier. They don't say how it's a threat multiplier, they just say by acting as a threat multiplier. Whereas the federal government led mobilizations during World War II and the New Deal created the greatest middle class the United States has ever seen, but many members of the front line and vulnerable communities were excluded from many of the economic and societal benefits of those mobilizations. And whereas the House of Representatives recognizes that a new national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization on a scale that has not been seen since World War II, and the New Deal is a historic opportunity. That was a voice crack right there. One, to create millions of good high-wage jobs in the United States. Two, to provide unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States. And three, to counteract systemic injustices. Now, therefore, be it. 1. Resolve, that is the sense of the House of Representatives, that 1 keep stuttering so much, is the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. A, to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transition for all communities and workers. I'm just going to stop right there. I don't think that the workers or the communities would agree with their methods of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions at all. I don't think they would think that it's fair. I think they would believe that it would be a major threat to their financial stability, in that they wouldn't be able to manufacture the same way, and they would probably have a lower manufacturing rate of whatever product they're, making or creating or whatever. I don't think that they agree with their ways of doing anything, for that matter. I think they're making generalizations about how the American people would view this new Green Deal, and how they would think that it's this great thing that everyone just could be on board with, except for those all terrible Republicans and whoever else disagrees with this whole Green New Deal. Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
So I think the biggest thing is when, and you see this a lot when it comes to statistics and surveys and questionnaires, is that when someone asks the broad question, a lot of people will answer in the affirmative. Are you for gun control? Most people will say yes, because gun control can mean so many things. Are
Yeah.
you for cleaner, greener emissions? Are you for a Green New Deal? Most people will say yes, because they don't know exactly what it means. But
Exactly.
when you start saying, okay, well, let's dig down a little bit. Are you for restricting car use to none? Are you for getting rid of all cars? A lot more people will say no, and a lot more people will say, okay, well, are you for uh, only being able to ride train? And a lot more people will say no, that
Exactly.
won't work for me. So when you start digging down into the more minutia of the details of what it means to be a cleaner, greener United States, more and more people fall off the bandwagon until
Exactly.
you're left with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, essentially.
Exactly. Great point. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what they're kind of suggesting here, is that when they say net zero greenhouse gas emissions, they're like, most people would agree with that. We need net zero. But when it comes to how they're going to get that, a lot of people just start to lose interest and start to vote for other people. Mike, are you going to say something?
Do you think that there are free market solutions to environmental issues that may exist?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, totally. Greener, more fuel efficient solutions are a natural cause of a free market. The more free a market is, the more energy efficient the energy market will become. That's
Yeah.
like, if you look at cars were naturally and were already going for better gas mileage before any kind of government intervention happened. I mean,
Exactly.
you look at the original Prius, there was the Chevy Volt, I think it was, that uh, was already being planned and designed before Obama even took presidency with his solar and electric plan.
Yep.
So a free market solution, a free market answer, is and always will be possible when it comes to energy output and energy efficiency. And then there's also idea or the science that's actually almost market viable, which is actually taking carbon out of the air and turning it into either gasoline, coal, or a solid state. So there's already going to be a solution to the pollution that is coming more out of China and India. And it'll do it in such a way that it actually doesn't punish people trying to just have a better life in those countries.
Yeah, and I think also um, when you're talking about more efficient energy sources, if people are if the vast majority of people, which I'm not saying is true, are want to switch over to solar, there is going to be a vastly bigger market for solar, and there are going to be lots and lots and lots of corporations that are going to try to put out the best solar panels for the lowest possible price, and then in turn that profit incentive profit incentive, am I using the right term, whatever, there is going to drive them to create more and more innovation in terms of what kind of energy that their individual solar panels can produce. And I mean, solar panels is just one sort of energy source that they are proposing, but there's obviously way more that the free market could absolutely lower the price of manufacturing on as time goes by.
Because my conservative grandfather, who um, his politics aside, he's actually stated that he would, with moving to solar, if it were simply more easily available and more efficient, said that some of the he actually didn't he is in Arizona, and he actually voted against that had to do with solar.
Yeah.
And he said it was because of some of the ramifications it would have had besides solar on his electric bill, I guess. So you're probably right that like the whole, as far as like that market is concerned, the free market's probably a better idea than
Government intervention. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's definitely a discussion that is worth having. And I think it's, yeah.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point about the Green New Deal, in fact, is the fact that there is an absence of one of the most clean, quote unquote, most clean solutions there is, which
Yeah,
is nuclear
nuclear. Yeah,
power.
exactly.
And when you look at solar, when you look at wind, it has number one, it has problems with expansion. Being able to supply a whole city with solar and wind is a lot more difficult. Uh, but number two, wind has a bigger problem because the wind stops blowing. But
Exactly.
solar specifically has an issue of storage being a problem because you have to basically put more solar panels, collect more energy during the day than you would need in the whole day, and then
Yep.
store it some way. And that is not something that's very market viable right now, nor is it
Exactly.
something that a lot of people are thinking about. Whereas nuclear is relatively clean. When done properly, it's almost harmless in the sense that no actual uh, damage is ever brought. No nuclear facilities ever actually melt down. Um, and it's just a better alternative as a whole. So the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and this whole Green New Deal would ignore one of the more safe, more efficient, more practical ways of doing it signals to me that this is more of an optics thing than it is an actual earnest attempt at solving a climate change issue.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about nuclear energy and how it when we're talking about how it, like most of the anti-nuclear people, which is probably AOC and basically her kind of close, her supporters and all that, I think their basic argument against it, like it's not so much an argument as it is fear mongering against that, like they're basically, if they wanted to do a campaign ad against nuclear, the only thing they would have to do would be to basically show a bunch of pictures of Fukushima and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and then just like talk about how those were so devastating, and then all these Republicans want to install not millions, but lots and lots of nuclear power plants here, and how it would devastate much of the United States. I think that's basically what their whole argument would be. Because there's really nothing else they can say other than it could cause a disaster, and and we have no way of storing. We don't have an efficient way of using or storing nuclear waste. I think that'd be their only argument, which is a terrible argument.
Right. I mean, we have plenty of places in the desert, in New Mexico, in Arizona, that we already are storing nuclear waste. So there's a point there. We can already store it. And this is what people always get wrong with Fukushima, is the fact that that disaster wasn't necessarily an issue of the nuclear plant failing.
Yep.
It was an issue of it being in a bad location.
Yep.
And the rising sea tide basically went up into the system and caused salt water to go into the nuclear plant and cause corrosion, and that corrosion broke down the system. So really what we should have learned from Fukushima is that you don't have a nuclear plant connected to the ocean because of rising tides and ebbs and flows and variable factors. And in fact, if you talk to any civil engineer who works with water, they'll tell you like the most dangerous variable in any plan is water. It's always water flow, water rising, water falling that will cause the most problems for any kind of facility at all.
Yeah. Yeah, well, sorry, go.
Thorium.
What was that?
Thorium. It's different from uranium. Apparently, there are actually some that use it, and
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
it's likely to cause a disaster than uranium.
Oh yeah, it's a much more unstable. Well, not much more. It's a more unstable element than uranium when you're talking about its reactivity to other substances. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much the gist of it. Yeah.
And there were obviously the thorium car that was talked about turned out to be bull, but the thorium itself is real, and I guess it's more common than uranium and all that. So I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I think nuclear is something that we shouldn't fearmonger over, although we should be cautious when using it. Definitely.
Yeah. Do you guys have any more final thoughts before we keep reading? All right. Yeah. We're going to keep going. Well, it just starts after A on page 5, number 1. B, to create millions of good high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States. C, to invest in infrastructure and industry in the United States to sustainably meet the challenges of the 21st century. D, secure for all people of the United States for generations to come. 1, clean air and water. 2, climate and community resilience. 3, healthy food. 4, access to nature. That's a bit of a weird one. 5, a sustainable environment. And E, this is the next section, to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous communities, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural. I think this is like a repeat of what they said before, but it's just basically talking about all the disaffected communities, migrants, deindustrialized, depopulated, poor, low income, women, the elderly, unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. That's exactly what they said before, but that's all right. 2, the goals describe. Actually, let's stop there. They don't actually describe how they want to make these reparations. They're kind of just saying to promote justice and equity. If by equity, I don't know what they mean by equity, because if they're talking about by making reparations or they say and repairing historic, do they mean like redistribution of wealth or redistribution of property or something like that, because that, like, they
That's
don't
usually
actually describe
exactly
it.
what equity means.
Yeah.
Anytime you hear the word equity, it usually means redistribution through some kind of force or through some
Yeah,
kind
and
of
I mean, like,
government. Yeah.
if you talk to people like now, and you're like, so you remember, like, it was maybe 50 years ago, we had this thing called segregation, um, and basically because of the things that happened then, we're gonna have to take a percentage of your tax dollars and are gonna give it back to some of these communities. How's that sound? None of the people around today would say yes, except for, I don't know, 1% of the AOC kind of crowd. But even them, they would probably be having to make a significant amount of money to be able to be willing to give any portion of their tax dollars to these communities, or any property they have to these communities. I think they'd be the vast majority of people would just be very hesitant to do that.
What's confusing to me about this is that this is supposed to be a clean air green deal, right? About the environment and economic
Yeah.
the environment. But then we just have spliced in here this justice and equity for minorities and peoples of color and things like that. And that's all well and good, right? You don't want to, harm people disproportionately, but to me, the only way I can circle the fact that they have this in there is that they're implying that people of color and these impressed communities are somehow causing more damage to the environment, because why is it in there if it's not? It's either one of two things. It's in there because this deal isn't just about the environment, or it's in there because they believe that minorities, poor, and indigenous communities cause more environmental damage.
Yeah. And it all ties back into, like, their motive, like what they actually want to do, kind of jumps around the place as we read through this document. Like, at one point, they're talking about how they want to reduce carbon emissions, or make it not reduce carbon emissions, make it net zero. And then in the next page, they're talking about promoting equity. And it's like you pretty much have to tackle one of these issues at once for it to be actually a plausible scenario that we would be able to actually, try and complete. Like, it's one thing to try to get to net zero emissions, but then to also try to promote, like, equity, or even, like, whatever they. I don't think they just want to promote equity, to be honest. I think they actually want to, start to, like, enforce some of these regulations. But that's aside the point. I think that, like, they need to just pick one goal. Like, well, they don't need to just pick one goal, but if they're gonna start off with net zero emissions, they have to kind of just stick with that. They have to fix that problem before they can move on to other things, because that in itself is about, probably, I want to say, $20 trillion in the next, 30 or so years. So.
Yeah, and the hardest thing about this for me is that we just have to get back to the fact that, according to the IPCC, right, according to the International something on climate change, I forget what it stands for, by their own words, they say that even if we were to reduce our emissions to zero in the next 15 or X years, that there would still be a 1.5 to, at its most extreme, 4-degree change in the world's climate. So
Yeah.
even if tomorrow you could wave a magic wand, dead stop not only the United States, because it's not just us, but India, China, and everyone else from producing carbon emissions, we would still have these issues that people are worried about. And so then the question becomes, okay, even if all this is true, even if we do all these things, how is this going to solve that issue in the future? And the Green New Deal can only get us to a net carbon emission of zero.
Yeah.
By basically cutting out any of all of our emissions. So even this plan won't solve the issues that they're saying we need to worry about.
Yeah, and it ties back into my other point, is that we aren't the majority of the carbon emissions or the majority of the people that are contributing to this climate change. It is mostly these developing countries. And if AOC thinks that, like, even if we were to do it, if she thinks that they are willing to do it, she is very, very wrong. If she thinks that these people in power in India or in China are willing to sacrifice their entire economy so that the percentage of a degree Celsius of warming would be uh, like slowed down or like stopped, like they're out of their minds. These developing countries would not sacrifice trillions and trillions of dollars to fulfill this kind of plan.
Yeah, not only that, but I have a very moral issue with saying that. Like, who are we, and how dare we say that? Oh well, even though we for the last 200 years have emitting carbon and expanding our economy and bettering our people's lives, now that we've got ours, you guys need to stop. China, you need to stop making your people's lives
Exactly.
better. You need to stop. India needs to stop. It's so it's a double standard, and it's so immoral for someone to turn around after they've progressed and benefited from a system to then say you can't have this system
Yeah.
because it might harm me, even
Yeah.
though it's been harming it's just so wrong on so many levels.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I think a lot of people are thinking that right now. Well, the people that have read this deal or that know about it, I think a lot of them aren't willing to do a lot of these things that AOC and these people are proposing, just because of how it would affect their livelihoods and how they're able to live their lives. I think if it were more of a free market driven, if there was sort of a profit incentive for trying to impose these measures, I think that a lot of Americans would agree with it. But I think when it comes to government intervention and forcing, at this point it's not forcing, but if they were able to put this into place at the federal level or even at the state level, I think a lot of people would definitely, like, at worst case scenario, they'd just leave, or the people are just not ready to give up their freedom that easily to try to reduce the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming.
Yeah, and like I said before, we'll just assume all their science is correct. I have my grievances about it, but let's just assume it for the sake of argument, because you
Yeah.
gotta go where the people are, where the everybody agrees on the facts. So let's just concede that point that uh, global warming is a thing. It's happening. It's being promulgated by human beings' consumption. The answer isn't to cut our emissions to zero in the sense of that that we starve ourselves of energy, and we starve ourselves of those benefits.
Yeah.
The real and more moral answer, and the answer that will work better in the long run, because we in India and negotiations with other countries to do it, is to reverse engineer it. Like I've said before, we have the ability to direct air capture carbon from the air, pull carbon from the air, turn it into a solid or liquid, and would therefore make our emissions a net zero if we, of course, tied that energy to something that wasn't carbon emitting. But
Yeah.
if you really wanted to have a real discussion about how we deal with climate change, you wouldn't be proposing things that hamstring markets and industries. You would be proposing things that punish the polluters, right? The people that are doing harm, that are hurting people,
Yeah.
and promoting those that are trying to fix that harm.
Yeah.
And so, and this will actually give me a lot of grievance in the libertarian community, because taxation is theft, quote unquote.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I firmly believe that a carbon tax that, number one, you could even have a carbon tax that the money goes back to the people at the end of the year. But even if you had a carbon tax that went to uh, promoting these carbon capturing systems, I think that would be not only a beneficial thing, but a moral thing, in the sense that we're punishing those that are hurt and promoting those that are healing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can definitely agree with that.
So as a minor
Yeah, go ahead.
anarchists, I assume you can to some extent believe in taxation, just not a lot, right? Because anarchists are the one who believes that there should be no taxes at all whatsoever, right?
Yeah. So I don't even believe in taxing for the sake of taxing. I believe the only time taxation is justified is to fix externalities, is to basically when harm is being done to somebody, you can tax that harm and use it as reparations, right? So that's why, somebody emitting carbon, emitting pollution that makes it harder for people to breathe or causes sea levels to rise, I'm okay with taxing that because it's hurting other people, and therefore we have to rectify that harm. Uh, Really, that's the only kind of taxation I'm okay with. Carbon tax. You could even argue that you need some kind of property tax on people because of needs of national defense. Basically, that their inability to protect themselves or their lack of ability to protect themselves causes externality harm to me as their neighbor. So yeah, very few taxes.
Well, I think there would be an argument there. So you're talking about how I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but you're talking about how basically any like the harm that would be done to other people by someone should be taxed, is what I'm getting from you. Like people that are polluting that would be harming another person, the polluter should be taxed based on how much they're polluting or however the system would be developed. I think definitely from sort of the left side of the aisle would argue that that's sort of an argument for equity, not in the sense that you would be paid. So when you say taxation for like say for carbon emissions, where would that money be going to? Would it be going to the people that are getting harmed, or would it be going to the government?
So that's an interesting concept. There's two ways of looking at it, and I agree with the first one. But if for sake of, if that's I agree with the first way, which is you tax everybody according to how much their carbon they're emitting, and then you would redistribute it uh, equally between everyone or the whole population that's being taxed. So if you had like 10 people in a room and two people were polluting $5 worth of carbon, then you would tax them that $5 worth and you would distribute the dollars back to everyone, giving them $1 for essentially the harm that's been incurred by being in a room that's now more full of carbon. So I think that's the most moral way of doing it. But there is a pragmatic argument that you could say, oh, well, we have to give it to people who are coming up with ideas to stop the already trending action of global warming.
Yeah, well, I think there's a when you're talking about like the 10 people in a room analogy, and I'm not saying that would be an actual realistic situation, but like that's because because they're polluting more, you should tax them at a higher rate. That's kind of like that. Like I don't know if you see where I'm going with this, but that's kind of what like people like Bernie Sanders and AOC are proposing, is that if you're earning more, you should be taxed at a higher rate. You should 70, 90%, based on how much you're earning, because you're earning more than the other people sitting in the room, you know, probably. And I think that it's kind of an argument for redistributionism. I obviously don't think you meant it that way, but I mean, I think that like taxing people and then giving the wealth back to the other people is in effect a form of redistributionism. But feel free to comment there.
Yeah, so it is a form of redistributionism. The difference here is that I make no difference between the richest man and the poorest man, right?
Yeah.
We'll bring it a little bit more to the real world. If we had someone who made 30 grand a year, but through some magical, mystical way was able to dump out 40 times the amount of carbon that a 1%er would,
Yeah.
that person who only makes 30K a year would be taxed at that amount.
Yeah.
So it's more on their output, on their actions, and the way you would more or less do it is through what's called a carbon tax, where you calculate about an approximate amount of harm that the person is doing per carbon ton, and then tax them on that. So it's redistributive in the fact that you are taking money from the actor who's doing the wrong thing and giving it to those who are doing less of or none of the wrong thing, which is very much different from what Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez propose, because they say, regardless of how good you are of a carbon emitter, we're going to tax you because of your wealth.
Yeah, and I wasn't insisting that was your point, and obviously I was trying to act like a devil's advocate, and obviously I would agree that it wouldn't be that much of a form of redistributionism, as in like as so much that socialism would be a form of redistributionism, or communism, or something like that, or like Marxism in general. I was just trying to play devil's advocate for a second there, but obviously you're absolutely right that it would be make no difference between whether you're rich or poor. You would be taxed no matter what your income level was if you're emitting carbon significantly more than someone else. But
Yeah, and I thank
yeah.
you for that clarification. It did need a clarification. Yeah, this is not redistributive in the sense of how most progressives talk about it. This is applying punishment equally and solving harm equally.
Micah, do you want to add something?
So taxation, I think I think we talked about Liberland earlier. Briefly, I think this was before we started the stream, and I think that if it actually ends up going anywhere, which it probably won't, but if it does, and it's a tiny little thing, but like little micronation, the way they want to run it is through voluntary taxation and cryptocurrency, and I think that'd be an interesting little experiment to have. The system could potentially work, and hypothetically, if it were to go well, then I think that could potentially set a precedent for changes in the future, and all I have to say, pretty much.
Any final thoughts, guys, or should we keep going here?
I'm ready to keep plugging along.
All right. Yeah. The goals described in subparagraphs A through E of paragraph 1, referred in this resolution as the Green New Deal goals, should be accomplished through a 10-year national mobilization referred to. So actually, I'm going to stop right there. The Green New Deal, like at the beginning of this, I was thinking that, like, how much that this would be, like, where this would be enforced, like if it was on a state level or it was on the federal level, and obviously now they're talking about a national mobilization. I think there'd be a huge disconnect between the people living in California and the people living in, say, Pennsylvania, on how they would view this new Green Deal. And I think that there's definitely a discussion to be had about how these new proposals would affect someone in one part of the country that wouldn't affect someone else in the part of the country, that would make that someone else in the part of the country more willing to vote for something that would actually be harmful to other people. But I mean, now that we know it's like it's something that needs to be enforced on a federal level, I think definitely, as you pointed out at the beginning of this, it's definitely starting to have the scent of a sort of an authoritarian kind of look to it. But I mean, obviously, it's nothing too extreme as of right now. It's not really in the purview of Congress to enforce this right now. I don't think they can, as of right now, be able to put this into effect. But definitely, if they had the power to do that, I think they would have done it already, for the most part. Which is kind of a scary thing, but I mean, it's good that we have a system that keeps them away from that kind of decision-making ability.
Yeah, thank God for checks and balances and constitutional rights. That's for sure.
Yeah. Anyways, that require the following goals and projects. A, building resiliency against climate change-related disasters, such as extreme weather, including by leveraging funding and providing investments for community-defined projects and strategies. B, repairing and upgrading the infrastructure in the United States, including 1, by eliminating pollution and greenhouse gas emissions as much as technologically feasible, and 2, by guaranteeing universal access to clean water, 3, by reducing the risks posed by flooding and other climate impacts, and 4, by ensuring that any infrastructural bill considered by Congress addresses climate change. C, meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources, including 1, by dramatically expanding and upgrading existing renewable power sources, and 2, by deploying new capacity. I just want to stop there. I don't think that any of the energy solutions that they have would be able to meet 100% of the power demands of the United States. I just don't think so. I don't think the United States would be able to switch to solar or wind or whatever kind of energy source they're proposing. I just don't think they would be able to convert that many. Like, I don't think they would be able to get off fossil fuels entirely or any kind of other energy source, and still be able to meet 100% of the power demand. I just don't think that's possible.
Yeah, so there's this thing, at least in the solar industry, it's called the duck problem, in the sense that obviously the sun only shines for a certain amount of days, and then you can't produce energy when it's not shining. So what happens for any other kind of supporting energy system, whether it even be nuclear, which is relatively clean, even if they were to introduce that, is that you have to power down that facility during the middle of the day when solar's producing energy, and then at night you have to ramp it back up. And
Yep.
number one, that's not market viable, so you can't ask the private market to necessarily do that. But number two, it's really dangerous in the sense that it puts a lot of wear and tear on the machinery inside the facility, regardless of what kind of facility it is. So for you to have solar or even have wind as being the sole provider of electric energy in the United States, you would have to solve this duct problem, and you would have to essentially solve the issue of energy storage, which uh, the only person who's even gotten close to quote unquote solving it is, Elon Musk with his Tesla wall. And
Mm-hmm.
even that causes an extreme amount of pollution to the point that it would not make it viable for this 10-year plan.
Yep. And I think I can't remember exactly where I read this, but in Sweden, they had they are at the moment trying to implement, like, I think it's a 70% renewable energy. Like, they're trying to hit that percentage, and what their problem is that it's not always, like, obviously it's not always windy, and so when they'll have these massive droughts of energy, and then they have these massive surpluses, but they have no way of storing the surpluses and, like, just taking whatever they don't need from the surpluses and storing it for when there's a drought. They just can't do that. And when there's a drought, they just can't meet the energy needs that they need to. And the same problem presents itself with solar. Yeah, I mean, it's just not as perfect as they actually want to think it is.
I actually would like to say something. The Teslas, environmental impact, I actually do think that they're really cool. I have an uncle who owns a Model 3. I've also gone test runs, and it is an absolutely fantastic car. I'm just going to leave it at that. pretty expensive car, but you know it is a thing.
Yeah,
Although
obviously
the
it'd
Model
probably be
3
expensive.
isn't. The Model 3, if you get like the bare bones version of it, is relatively within the range of a. But like all the ones with the bells and whistles are pretty expensive. But still, I do like them.
John, do you want to add anything before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, so I live in the Bay Area, so I know all about Teslas. They're everywhere. They're rampant. And a big thing about Teslas, like I said before, is the process to make those batteries is so energy heavy. You know, you don't pull a brand new Tesla battery out of the ground. You've got to refine lithium
Yeah.
and all the other chemicals that go into the battery. That you know the emission point 0 point, you know, when basically the cost of the carbon emissions that cost or that are incurred when making the Tesla and the you know, carbon emissions that it saves by being an electric car. I think if I remember right, if I'm remembering right, it happens about at the 5th year.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about a 10-year plan and we got to get that going now, you would have to have uh, an insane amount of Teslas being created within a 4-year window, and then people accepting them and junking their old cars,
Yeah.
and
No,
you know, it's just not viable.
they're a cool car. I'm not actually saying that they're a solution to anything.
No. We get. Yeah, I think it's just a more. It's a broader point about how, like, just most electric cars. Um, it takes a lot. It takes a long time before they're like long. I say long time by. You know how long you actually would own. Various luxuries, but I think that a lot of people wouldn't be willing to switch over to electric over there what they've been using for however long, and I don't think those people that like I know it's kind of a straw man, but like even the people that have like have a particular like the people that collect say for like it's a very um small portion of people, but people that say collect cars or want to get the newest Ferrari or Lamborghini or what, well, like it doesn't even have to be a very expensive car. The people that have those kind of attachments to their cars that run on obviously fossil fuels wouldn't be willing to give up their um, them so easily. But that's just like a small like portion of people. The real people that would be affected by this are those people that have their cars that would cost significantly less than having to buy an electric car for, you know, 50% more money, which would cost them, about over time, like 100,000 extra dollars, which I think when we're talking about trying to help the people in need, that would definitely not help them in any sort of way if they, like, I can't remember who published um, this study, but it was like they found that like buying an old car and running that would be more fuel efficient than buying an electric car just because of how much carbon emissions it takes to produce those separate cars um, over a lifetime of however long they would be using that car for. But kind of
Yeah, I read that one too, and I don't remember where it came from either. But yeah, and that's the thing you kind of have to remember with this deal. There's a reason why they're saying we need to tax the rich in order to have this happen, is because all of these policies that they're proposing, if not done with the money of the wealthy, would be so highly harmful to the average person.
Yep.
And so that's where the moral question comes in, right? Why is it not okay for them to harm the average person, but more okay to harm the rich or the people that have done better for themselves?
Yeah.
You'd have to make a delineation between those who are poor and those who are rich at like a moral level, saying that they are not the same as us, therefore we're allowed to do them harm. And I just don't think that's right on a moral level.
Yeah. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the kind of the analogy with the people in the room, right? If I have $10 and you two guys have no money, it would be like the good thing to do would be to beat me up and take my $10 and split it amongst yourselves, right? But you just beat me up and took my money, so obviously we can't have that happen in our society. And obviously that's not a realistic example of how that would go down, but it's a metaphor for how this sort of stuff would impact different people over a period of time. And it kind of goes into the question of why should it be able, why, like as you said before, why should we take from them while why should they be harmed more than the other guy? But yeah.
Yeah, and I always think it's really ironic when you look at the Democratic Party, you look at the left and the people proposing this bill, is that they're supposed to be this party of inclusion and like empathy and sympathy and watching for not hurting people and hurting their feelings, and then they have these policies of just wanton disregard for individuals who have done well, or even individuals who are doing better than half of the people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's definitely a big discussion right now. But yeah, I think Micah, do you have anything else to add before we move on?
Not really.
All
Much
right.
is there left?
Not a lot. Like
Okay.
yeah. I'll speed read through the rest of it, and then we'll kind of just have a general discussion at the end. And yeah, I'll just read through these pages, and then we'll just talk about it after.
Sounds good.
Yeah. 3. By reducing risks posed by flood. Oh wait, no, I already read that. Here we go. By dramatically expanding and upgrading existing renewable power sources, by deploying new capacity, building or upgrading to energy efficient, distributed, and smart power grids, and working to ensure affordable access to electricity. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be very affordable, but I'll keep going. Upgrading all existing buildings in the United States and building new buildings to achieve maximal energy efficiency, water efficiency, safety, affordability, comfort, and durability, including through electrification. F. Spurring massive growth in clean manufacturing in the U.S. I'll just say U.S. and removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing and industry as much as technologically feasible, including by expanding renewable energy manufacturing and investing in existing manufacturing and industry. G. Working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the U.S. to eliminate pollution and the greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector as much as is technologically feasible. They use technologically feasible in about like 150 times in this Green New Deal, but I'll keep going. As much as technologically feasible, including 1. By supporting family farming, 2. By investing in sustainable farming and land use practices that increase soil health, and 3. By building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. H. Overhauling transportation systems in the U.S. to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sectors as much as technologically feasible, including through investment in zero-emission vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing, clean, affordable, and accessible public transportation, high-speed rail, mitigating and managing the long-term adverse health, economic, and other effects of pollution and climate change, including by providing funding for community-defined projects and strategies. Removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and reducing pollutions, including by restoring natural ecosystems through proven low-tech solutions that will increase soil, carbon storage, such as preservation and afforestation. K. Restoring and protecting threatened, endangered, and fragile ecosystems through locally appropriate and science-based projects to enhance biodiversity and support climate resiliency. L. Cleaning up existing hazardous waste and abandoned sites to promote economic development and sustainability. M. Identifying other emission and pollution sources and creating solutions to eliminate them. And N. Promoting the international exchange of technology, expertise, products, funding, and services with the aim of making the United States the international leader on climate action and to develop other countries to achieve a Green New Deal. 3. A Green New Deal must be developed through transparent and inclusive consultation, collaboration, and partnership with the frontline and vulnerable communities, labor unions, worker cooperatives, civil society groups, academia, and businesses. And 4. To achieve a Green New Deal and mobilization, a Green New Deal that will require the following goals and projects. Providing and leveraging in a way that ensures the public receives appropriate ownership stakes and returns on investment. Adequate capital, including through community grants, public banks, and other public financing. Technical expertise supporting policies and other forms of assistance to communities, organizations, federal, state, and local government agencies, and business working on the Green New Deal mobilization. B. Ensuring that the federal government takes into account the complete environmental and social costs of the impacts of emissions through 1. Existing laws, 2. New policies and programs, and 3. Ensuring the frontline and vulnerable communities that shall not be adversely affected. C. Providing resources. Okay, actually, you know what? This is taking a while. I think we're just kind of getting into a repeat of what it said before, basically ensuring clean water, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, and economic security, all that kind of stuff. It's basically just now it's tapping into the financial side of this, which is ensuring the protection of all these different kinds of economic establishments. So yeah, I think we're just going to get into the general discussion about this bill as a whole. John, you want to start off?
Yeah, and it's actually hinting at kind of what you were just saying, that this is a very long bill. And when you look at omnibus bills like this, whenever I hear or see or read one of these kinds of bills, whether they be from the left, with Green New Deals, or they be on the right when it comes to trade policies or military policies, I'm always wary of it, because when you have to fashion some kind of bill like this, or any bill that you fashion should be very concise. It should be, here's a problem, here's how we'll solve it, and here's the funding or the XYZ of it. And in this one, it goes through so many different layers of talking about different issues and different problems, that it doesn't ever really give a solid solution to. It doesn't say we're emitting too much through methane, right? Through cow farts or cow methane.
Yep.
And we're going to do this. And so broad generality bills like this are always dangerous, because it gives way too much leeway to either the executive branch or parts of the legislative branch to do as they see fit.
Yep.
So that's just a huge danger I see right off the start. But I mean, we've talked about a lot of the issues that I see with it. Is that, number one, other countries are not on board with this plan, so therefore we're not going to have that much of an actual solution.
Yep.
And in fact, I think it would be immoral to use any kind of military or tariff force to try to force them into doing it.
Yep.
When it comes to how it's targeting it on this 10-year plan, it's just not going to be able to happen. There's just no way to get everyone to have a different car or to give up the cars. There's no way that we even have the technology right now to implement a solar or wind system that would be able to support the whole of the United States, especially the northern states, and a lot of the little superfluous, tagged on resolutions that they want are just not I they're not economically feasible without, tanking our whole economy.
Yeah. Yeah. This whole deal is kind of it's a very, I don't even know how to put it. It's just ridiculous, the kind of things that they're proposing to do. I mean, right at the end there, I think it was on page 8. Yeah, page 9, the beginning of it. They're talking about overhauling transportation systems to eliminate pollution. What's their solution to that? High-speed rail, right? So they're getting rid of all air travel. They're getting rid of all cars. They're just going to replace it with high-speed rail, right? Ask the senator from Hawaii how she feels about taking a train from from Honolulu to Washington, D.C. whenever she needs to be down there, right? She's
Right.
gonna hate it, right? It's gonna take her like 3 days to get there. I mean,
Yeah, and that's building over an ocean. Have fun building any kind of land mass without any land mass beneath it.
yeah,
As a Californian, I could tell you right now, whatever amount they have earmarked for high speed rail for the whole entire nation, quadruple it, multiply it by 10, and you're probably still not even close to how much it's actually going to cost.
yeah,
We have a high speed rail system that was supposed to be going in here in California, and it's behind schedule, over budget, and not even technologically feasible when it comes to some of the things they're saying it's going to do. So,
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's
it's
it's kind of insane.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to get a little bit less serious, or I'm going to make a less serious point. This person who's proposing this bill has an economics degree.
Yeah.
And it's not from like University of Phoenix or something like that. She has an economics degree from Boston.
Yeah.
Like whoever, if I saw this kind of deal in a class and I was an economics teacher, I would give it a solid D and tell them to go back and say needs improvement, needs more planning, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
whoever gave her an economics degree has really devalued. Let me put it this way: the economics department of Boston has been significantly devalued by the kind of proposals that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has put forward.
I think it would be funny to go back to her economics teacher and be like, "Hey, what do you think of this new plan?" And it'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it's probably going to destroy most of our industry, but she's elected now."
I just want to see her school transcripts. That's what I want. I want
yes,
to see
exactly.
her grade transcripts. That should be the new controversy.
We need those. We need those published right now.
Yeah, we had the terrible, horrible Obama birther movement, but I think this is a better version of the birther movement, which is let's see her college transcripts and see what grade she got in those economics classes, because something wrong is going on there.
Yeah. Well, Micah, what are your general thoughts on this whole thing?
I think, I don't know, I mean, the whole thing, trying to force the whole green thing, I think it's forceful. I mean, the only thing that I think the government could do that might be effective would simply be rewarding companies or people who do things that are beneficial for the environment while disincentivizing doing things that are bad for the environment. But beyond that, we need to be promoting context of the free market.
So you would agree with? Oh, Go ahead.
Um, I um, don't think that the Green New Deal will pass.
Yeah, obviously not. Probably.
Anytime soon. Hypothetically, the only way it could happen would be next time that the Democrats control the entirety of Congress, then maybe it could happen. But they don't. They would also need a Democratic president for that to work. So
Yeah.
eh, I think the only thing good that might come out of this would be raising awareness. But even then, I'm not sure if it'll, because not that many people really world that don't pay attention to politics.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, this probably doesn't mean jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically my thoughts on this whole thing.
All right. Well, that has been the Green New Deal. Do we want to run through the Libertarian Party website?
Is John still here?
Yeah. He's
Yeah,
still-
it's a pretty hefty amount of legislation. I think what we're trying to get to is maybe some of the disagreements that I have with the Libertarian Party. So if we want to just kind of get to the point, I guess I could talk a little bit about that if you guys are willing.
I
Yeah.
have it up right now on my web browser. Like, what I could do is the platform itself isn't super big. So I feel like I could like read individual things, talk about whether or not I agree with it to you, and see if you disagree or if you agree,
I think we could,
etc.
I think we could just like I don't think we necessarily have to read the paragraphs of what like the what the website says. I think we can just talk about like the 1.1 self-ownership expression, but the broader subject being personal liberty or economic liberty or all this different kind of stuff. But we're going on almost 2 hours coming up, so it's yeah.
I feel like we should just make this quick and or as quick as possible, and then we'll be done.
Yep.
So self-ownership, I pretty much agree with that as a concept. I mean, that's a pretty standard thing to agree with, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with self-ownership. When people knowingly and voluntarily do what they want to do, that there's nothing wrong with that. I would only say that that does require a great deal of knowledge. So
Yeah.
if between utopia and here, we wanted to create a system where we promoted through government or through other entities fullness of knowledge, that would be something beneficial.
Yeah.
Expression and communication, so that's free speech, basically. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Pretty strongly. Libertarians advocate individual privacy and government transparency. So yeah, that's like I think that's a little jab at the NSA, basically. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
Relationships, basically just saying sexual orientation, gender have an effect on how the government legally treats you, and I pretty much agree with that. I don't think that I mean, that's, again, this is still standard stuff for most people, but yeah. This one. Abortion. Oh, did you tell him your name?
Yeah, John.
I don't know. You have you already told him your name? I think I accidentally just let it slip. If you didn't.
Yeah, my name is Isaac. What
Okay.
do you mean?
And I'm Micah.
Okay,
All right.
yeah.
Anyway,
What?
yeah, abortion. Discuss that at length. What do you think about it, John?
I am very much anti-abortion. I believe that life begins at, or not even life. I believe that rights begin at brain activity, which is about the fourth to sixth. They haven't refined it. Obviously, as technology gets better, it'll probably be about the fourth to fifth week. But right now, we can detect it about 6 weeks. So I
Well,
think anything after that is
if brain activity means that if something, I assume by that you mean like having consciousness and stuff like that,
yes,
means that it
yeah,
gets rights.
yeah.
I mean, I more or less agree with that, but I think like what in the future that's gonna be a thing when if like AI happens, like do simulated or do computer or digital, non-biological consciousness get rights, etc. That's a whole thing, but I don't really want to get into that because that's a big tangent. But I just figured I'd mention it because it's kind of cool.
Well, and
Yeah,
John,
yeah.
you were saying brain activity. So are you saying like at 4 to 5 weeks that's when you can't have an abortion, or are you saying pretty much all the way through?
Yeah, I'm saying basically when brain activity in the child starts, which is very much in tangent with or in parallel with the heartbeat. So after a heartbeat or after brain activity, which is pretty much the same time,
Oh,
I would not be for abortions.
I assume in the case of life of the mother or fatal fetal defect, you would still be okay with it in after that.
Life of the mother, I would definitely be okay with that. I think there's a big difference between, treating, let's say, the mother's cancer and the child dying uh, as part of that, as opposed to, the child being killed for uh, X, Y, or Z reason.
And then, of course, fatal fetal defect is essentially the child is. It might not even have a head, but fatal fetal defect is, and if it doesn't have a head, it doesn't have a brain. So just just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, yeah, no, for that one, I think a lot of people sometimes hear that and they don't understand the nuances because there is, fetal defect can mean a lot of different things. It can mean the baby's missing a leg, it's missing an arm. Those are not justified reasons for aborting
I
a
said
child.
specifically fatal fetal defect.
Yeah, so yeah, if you say fatal fetal defect, I would agree with that because they are, in a sense, already dead or dying.
Anyway,
Well,
parental
actually,
right.
I just wanna jump in here for a second. You were talking about brain activity. Now, uh, so by brain activity, what do you mean by that? Because the brain tissue starts developing almost immediately as it's starting to, um, you know, form at the very small level. Do you mean like its ability to sense pain, or its ability to like I don't know I don't know exactly what you mean by brain activity.
Yeah, so in the most scientific terms, when the first electrical current goes through any kind of brain cell, uh, that's when I would consider it a living being with rights.
You know
So
when that point is.
I believe, and I'm not a doctor and not a medical professional of any kind. But from the research
Okay.
that I've done, is it's about when heartbeat begins. But there is, and there may be because we can't detect it yet, a difference between when heartbeat begins and brain activity begins. That the heart may beat before the brain actually starts going.
Right.
All right.
Parental rights. Uh, okay, so this is pretty short, so I'll just read it. Parents or other guardians have the right to raise their children according to their own standards and beliefs, provided that the rights of their children to be free from abuse and neglect are also protected.
Yeah, I'm, I'm fine with that one. I think the family structure is one of the core structures of any society and any group. So
I think that
parental
was a
rights and yeah,
pretty inoffensive one, in my opinion.
yeah.
I think this is gonna be the big
Not a
one
very
though.
controversial.
The biggest one is gonna be right here: crime and justice, and then the death penalty.
Yeah, that's definitely not a controversial subject. Okay, first crime and justice, then death penalty, I guess.
Yeah. So like, obviously, basically the big libertarian thing is that people shouldn't be prosecuted for the use of drugs for medicinal or recreational purposes. And obviously, prostitution should be legalized and shouldn't be prosecutable by crime. And gambling and all that kind of stuff shouldn't be prosecutable as well. I think I don't know. I think that's pretty much
I say what
where.
I think.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know how I feel about. I think prostitution is combating whatever leads to that even being a thing in the first place, rather than it illegal. And as far as drugs are concerned, I definitely don't support legalizing all drugs. Like, I think if you want to legalize meth, although even then, I don't think necessarily that. I think that you should probably have a more rehabilitative thing than just a purely punitive. And as far as like weed is concerned, legalizing weed, I'm gonna be honest. But other drugs, no. Maybe some other drugs. I haven't done research on most drugs because there's a lot of drugs out there. Cocaine, methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is one of the worst. Heroin's pretty. Actually, I feel like I remember seeing a list of what the most addictive drugs are, and I'm pretty sure heroin and like cocaine were like at the top of the list.
Heroin definitely is. I don't know about cocaine. Most opioids are highly addictive.
Yeah,
I don't
cocaine
remember.
definitely
Top
would be at the
five.
top of that list.
Okay.
Sorry,
Actually, yeah. Some of the most addictive drugs by this definition: cocaine, heroin, alcohol, nicotine, and methamphetamine. Yeah. Anyway, that's just my opinion. John, you can go ahead and spill whatever you think about that.
Yeah, I'm okay for all the legalization of all drugs. There is an argument to be made. I think it's Locke. I don't think it's Hobbes, who makes the argument that drugs and alcohol and things like that can actually make you lose your autonomy. Basically, they turn on your lizard brain and shut off the part of your brain that has the concept of rights and concept of not harming others. And
Yeah.
so, therefore, if you would do, if that were true, if it were true that it shuts off the human part of the brain and turns you into a lizard brain, then you would lose your ability to have these rights, and therefore that type of thing should be banned.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't think I agree with that belief or position. And even in the the jury's still out, and anytime the jury is still out on something that's scientific like that, I would always default on giving people more freedom, until proven wrong. So
Yeah.
in that case, I would rather have all of it legalized, and then through studies, through analysis, through all the benefits that come with something being legalized, coming to the conclusion that, oh, this actually does turn you into a lizard, a lizard person, an animalistic person, and therefore maybe it's not protected under.
I think meth is probably a candidate for a drug that does that. Uh, as far as I think that, how do you feel about decriminalization as opposed to legalization for some drugs?
I definitely, I mean, I believe in legalization for most, but if I had to go into a legislative body and work a deal out, I would definitely in this moment take decriminalization of most, if not all,
Yeah.
drugs over
Yeah.
nothing happening. So
Yeah. And then prostitution.
that's an easy one. Prostitution should be legal for
Okay.
all those involved that are consenting adults. Um, that's not to say that we should allow for sex trafficked people to be put into public brothels and things like that. But if it's a willing woman or man and another willing woman or man, what is it any of our say to get in between that?
Yeah. And then of course, there's other ones, gambling and stuff, but based on what you've already said, I'm pretty sure
I'm pretty
already know
sure we
what you're
can all
gonna
guess
say.
the
So
answer. Yeah.
Well, I say ban blackjack because that's the devil's game.
That's true.
Nobody could win in that game really. So just get that out of the casinos.
And for in terms of crime and justice, like, w- do you think that our system needs to be changed in the way that sentencing should be less harsh? And well, I guess kind of ties into the next, like the little next paragraph. Oh, I just put my mic there, which is the death penalty. Where do you kind of stand on like sentencing and all that, and obviously the death penalty too?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start at death penalty because that's the easiest because it's the most extreme. There's a real breakdown when it comes to our judicial system when it comes to applying its retributive justice doctrines. And what retributive justice is the concept of, you've stolen this amount of money from someone or you've caused a person this amount of inconvenience and you must pay the equivalent, right? And so when you come to things like murder, things like rape, things like body mutilation slash imprisonment, that kind of stuff, uh, our justice system kind of breaks down in the sense that if you murder someone, somebody murdering you doesn't make it equal. It's two negatives, right? It's adding -1 to -1 just makes it -2. It doesn't make a net zero. And so in that sense, I don't think we should have the death penalty. Uh, and my better justification for it is that we should, number one, always default in giving people more liberty or not harming people. But then also number two, there's so many cases that are coming out now, 20, 30 years later, where we're finding out, oh, the facts weren't what they actually were. And so we should always be cautious of that and wary of that. And so it's a better moral society has a little bit more forgiveness than the next society over, right? Having that little bit of forgiveness builds a better society, and that's just a practical reason for not having death.
I jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I myself do think there should be more so a component of rehab for a lot of crimes, but I think that there needs to be some kind of psychological expert or whatever, and like I think we need to be able to make a determination that this person can be rehabilitated. Because even if they've done something really bad, that doesn't mean that there's no redeemability in them. There are people who are criminals their whole, like, you know what I mean, right? Like, there are people who like find religion when they're in jail. I don't really think that that's necessary, but I'm saying we can come to the conclusion that if we go by rehabilitating them, we can make them productive and safe for society again. Then I think that no, the death penalty shouldn't be done. Conclusion that it's a fool's errand to try and rehabilitate them, then I think that eventually, yeah, there comes a point where the death penalty may be necessary. And came out where Anders Breivik, who was in Europe, the terrorism thing, he killed a bunch of people, and so they tried very hard to rehabilitate him, and based on his actions after being arrested, I don't think there was any repentance within him. Like, he complained about how they didn't give him a PlayStation. Honestly, I think that there does come eventually a point necessary. But and then at the same time, there's also the fact that you just mentioned, which is that we don't always know for sure later on that they weren't even convicted for the right reasons. For that reason, I think that we should have the death penalty, but only as a very last resort, and it should be used as sparingly as possible. Like if we think only if we can determine that it's necessary and that there's no other option.
Yeah, it's an interesting philosophical idea that you kind of talk about with the core of our justice system, which is the idea that even if you could see into the future, right? If there was a murderer, right, and he killed someone and he'd been convicted and all that stuff, and you could see into his future that he was never going to commit another crime again and harm anybody, would you be justified in releasing him from jail? And I think, and the answer that I fall, or the side that I fall on, is that no, even if the murderer would never do anything wrong again, it is not right for society to release him. And so I think that way we actually should be more heavy with our punishments, in the sense that, trying to make them apply perfectly to the harm that's being done, uh, and only in the case of the death penalty, instead of outright killing them, because that's not our job to do as imperfect beings, is to grant them a little bit of mercy. Put them in solitary confinement for the rest of their life if you want to do X, Y, and Z, but um, keep them alive for the sake of having a society that believes in the idea of mercy and forgiveness, for smaller aggressions. But then also, um, just because at that point you're making a pragmatic argument. What's the difference between them being dead and them being in a jail cell the rest of their life? It's basically a dollar amount, and so I don't think that dollar amount is worth potentially being wrong and hurting someone.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a very complicated and dividing issue. Yeah, I mean, usually conservatives and libertarians are on par with most things, but obviously here, some of the kind of hardcore anti-criminal justice reform Republicans would say we need to keep the death penalty, and probably harsher sentencing would be better, even for small crimes. But I mean, yeah, it's just it's a very dividing issue.
Yeah. And I don't think harsher punishments for small crimes should be what we emphasize, but things like, you have a rapist, or you have a repeat uh, assault and battery person going free in 5 years, 4 years, before their full time is served. I think that's where the hand of law should be the heaviest, is making sure people fully pay for the harm that they've done, and not giving them an out because they've done X, Y, or Z rehabilitation program.
Yeah. Well, I think we gotta really move quickly here, so we'll just move into 1.9, and then I think all of 2 is we pretty much covered that in the Green New Deal, in that we think that free markets should be the thing that the government keeps out of the most, along with people's liberties. But obviously 1.9 being self-defense, obviously I would think that all of us agree that the Second Amendment is there to protect life, liberty, and property against government tyranny and for individual self-defense. But
Oh yeah, most
yeah.
definitely.
Micah, do you want to jump in here, or do you think we're all good there?
Huh.
Do you think we're all good? Do you think we're all in agreement about self-defense and gun control? Then we can move on. I don't know what just happened, but economic liberty. I don't think there is much to say on this, given that we just went through the Green New Deal, as I just said before. Unless you want to add something here, John.
Nope, I think we are pretty well talked through economic liberty and all the key points that the Libertarian Party would hit on.
Yeah, and obviously I just want to touch on one key point here. 2.3 is energy and resources. It says, while energy is needed to fuel a modern society, government should not be subsidizing any particular form of energy. We oppose all government control of energy pricing, allocation, and production. And I think many, if not all, conservatives would definitely agree with that, too.
Yeah, I say clear the whole board. Stop subsidizing solar. Stop subsidizing wind. Stop subsidizing oil.
Yep.
Let the free market fight it out, and we will find the best energy, and we will find the energy that benefits everybody at the least environmental cost.
Yeah.
Just naturally.
Micah, do you want to jump in here?
No, I don't.
All right. Last subjects 3. National defense. Libertarians Party obviously supports the maintenance of a sufficient military. I'm just reading from the page. Of a sufficient military to defend the United States against aggression. The United States should both avoid entangling alliances and abandon its attempts to act as a policeman for the world. We oppose any form of compulsory national service. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with the general sentiment. I think there's some subtle nuances there that can be more debatable. I think people have a natural inclination to help those who are being oppressed and who are being downtrodden on. Whether or not, well, not even whether or not, we are definitely not doing that in a beneficial or helpful way when it comes to places like the Middle East. But I believe there is some room for discussion when it comes to uh, uh, intervention, I guess is the only way to call it, intervention into situations like that. I think we can, not be harmful and not promulgate these long wars, but I think we can also help get some of those casualties, some of those civilians possibly out of the fray and out of the conflict.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to jump in here, or do you think we can keep going?
None of this stuff is really anything I'd probably have anything to say about, really, in this section.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a libertarian, so I agree with 95% of the stuff, and the other 5% I could I'm not sure about it. So, I'm willing to hear discussions and debates about it. But yeah, the Libertarian Party's it's my party right now. I wish it would do some more pragmatic things, more better, but it is the best party that I have available.
I think we can just skip through that because we're talking about mostly free trade and then representative government. I think we covered that too. I think the last thing that they have here, I think is just super. I think that's just fantastic. It's the last segment, 4.0 omissions. Our silence about any particular government law, regulation, ordinance, directive, edict, control, regulatory agency, activity, or machination should not be construed to imply approval.
I think it's so ironic that we have to include that nowadays. The fact that you don't voice an opinion automatically, you're choosing a side.
Yeah.
Like, there's an old Rush song that literally, and it's kind of ironic because it makes the implication that, even if you don't make a choice, you still have made a choice. But in this case, situation, in this world, it's like, even if you don't make a choice, you've made the wrong choice, the bad choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that just if the Republicans put that on their page, I don't know if they actually have. I think that would be fantastic for them. I don't actually care about the Democrats' page, but I mean, yeah, I think that's just a fantastic sentence, that silence about a particular thing shouldn't be automatically addressed as an approval of that particular thing. Yeah, I mean, but that's pretty much it for the libertarian thing, for the Green New Deal, for a little bit we covered the State of the Union, but any final thoughts, Micah or John?
I know.
No, I think we've had a great conversation here. For wrapping up, I just want to thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I think you're going to be definitely on here 90% of the time if we can get you out of your busy schedule. But yeah, I mean, I think that this has been a fantastic episode. This is probably like 2 hours and so minutes long, so this is definitely, I think most of it was that Green New Deal. I'd be surprised if anyone is still listening. They probably stopped after we started reading, but I hope not. I will put all the social medias and all the articles and stuff down in the description of the YouTube video. Yeah, I think this is us ending episode 3. So yeah. Goodbye.